I am glad to welcome everyone to this channel again. Imagine a simple shepherd who went in search of his father's missing donkeys and became the first king of Israel a few years later, but then turned into a madman, throwing spears at his entourage, chasing an innocent young man through the desert and consulting with the spirits of the dead in a desperate attempt to regain his lost power. The story of King Saul is a frightening answer to the question of what happens to a person when he gains absolute power and gradually loses all the restrictions that kept him within the bounds of morality and reason. Saul wasn't looking for power, he was just looking for his father's missing donkeys, doing a routine errand in the life of a young man from the tribe of Benjamin, Israel's smallest tribe. When the prophet Samuel unexpectedly anointed him king, his whole life changed forever, turning a simple shepherd into the ruler of an entire nation. The first days of his reign were triumphant. Saul proved his bravery when he defeated the Ammonites in a decisive battle, and the whole people rejoiced, seeing in him exactly the king they dreamed of. He was tall, taller than any Israelite by a full head, handsome in face, and surprisingly modest, which made it seem as if God had truly chosen the perfect ruler. But power is a strange substance that not only changes others, but slowly transforms the very person who holds it in his hands. The Philistines assembled a huge army, 30,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen and infantry, which was comparable to the sand on the seashore, and this frightening potential forced the Israelites to hide in caves in panic. Saul's army was melting away every day because the fear of a superior enemy was corroding the fighting spirit of the soldiers. The prophet Samuel promised to come in 7 days to sacrifice to God, and Saul waited, watching his army crumble from desertion. On the 7th day he made a fateful decision. He sacrificed with his own hands despite all prohibitions, because circumstances, as it seemed to him, left no choice. At that moment Samuel appeared and uttered terrible words. "You have acted foolishly, your kingdom will not stand." Saul did not understand the depth of his fall and was genuinely perplexed. What was wrong with acting for the sake of saving the people, and wasn't the result more important than formal rules? But the rules limit the power and remind the ruler that he is not God, and when the government decides that it is above the rules, that's when the fall into the abyss begins. The next order from God was harsh. Destroy the Amalekites completely, leaving nothing alive. Saul won a complete victory, but then he made a decision to leave the best cattle for sacrifices and to take King Agag alive as a trophy of victory. When Samuel arrived at the camp, Saul greeted him with a smile. "I have fulfilled the Lord's command." But the prophet, hearing the bleating of the sheep, asked with cold irony, "Then where does this bleating in my ears come from?" Saul began to justify himself, blaming responsibility. The people wanted to leave the best for sacrifice to God. Samuel interrupted him with a sentence. "Obedience is better than sacrifice because you rejected the word of the Lord. He rejected you from kingship." In desperation, Saul grabbed the prophet by the hem of his robe, but the cloak tore in his hands, and Samuel said, "So the Lord will tear the kingdom from you." And then he left forever. After being rejected by God, the evil spirit began to torment Saul with fits of rage and depression, making the king's life unbearable. The courtiers brought a young harpist named David, whose music calmed the king and drove away evil spirits. Saul sincerely loved this boy and made him his squire, but then an event occurred that finally broke the king's mental balance. The Philistine giant Goliath mocked the Israeli army for 40 days, but no one dared to go out against him, except young David with a sling. When the stone pierced the giant's forehead, the whole of Israel exploded in jubilation. Women came out of the cities singing, "Saul has slain thousands, and David has slain tens of thousands." Saul heard this song, and something in his soul turned upside down forever. They gave him tens of thousands, and I was given only thousands, so what's left for him but the kingdom? From that day on, envy entered the king's heart like a slow-acting poison. The next day, the evil spirit attacked Saul again, and while David was playing the harp, the king suddenly threw a spear with the thought, "I will nail David to the wall." David dodged, and this scene was repeated twice, proving that this was not an accident. Saul began to fear David with a strange fear, realizing that the Lord had abandoned him and was now with the young man. Fear made him act more cunningly. He offered David his daughter in marriage, but with the condition of dangerous battles, secretly hoping that his enemies would kill him. When this plan failed, Saul set the marriage ransom at 100 Philistine foreskin, a seemingly suicidal task. David brought in 200, and Saul was furious at the failure. Saul finally crossed the line when he openly ordered David's murder, turning personal paranoia into state policy. Jonathan, David's best friend, warned him, and David had to flee. A multi-year hunt began, in which Saul and 3,000 warriors chased one man through the deserts, turning the king into an obsessive hunter. Twice David could have easily killed Saul, but both times he spared him. "Why are you following me, and what have I done?" David shouted from afar. Saul cried with shame, "I have sinned, come back." But the next day he started a mad hunt again, losing control of himself. Saul was informed that the priests of the city of Nomba had helped David, and that was enough to anger him. 85 priests were brought to the throne, and Saul ordered the guards to kill them for helping the enemy. The soldiers refused to raise their hands against the anointed of God. Then Saul turned to Doeg the Edomite, a foreigner, who carried out the order in cold blood, killing 85 priests, and then destroying the entire city with women, children, and infants. The king of Israel slaughtered the innocent out of personal revenge, proving that the government had completely corrupted him. The Philistines had gathered a huge army again, and when Saul looked at the enemy camp, his heart was filled with horror. He tried to question God, turned to the prophets, and looked for signs in his dreams, but everywhere there was only oppressive silence. The Lord finally departed from Saul. In desperation, the king decided on the last crime. After disguising himself, he went at night to the witch in Endor to summon the spirit of the deceased Samuel. When the spirit appeared, the old witch screamed in horror. "Why did you bother me?" Samuel's spirit asked. Saul groaned. "God has departed from me, and I do not know what to do." Samuel pronounced a terrible sentence. "Why do you ask me? If the Lord has become your enemy, tomorrow you and your sons will be with me in the kingdom of the dead." The battle the next day was fierce, and Saul's 3 sons, the valiant Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchisua, fell defending their father. The gunmen concentrated their fire on the Tsar, inflicting severe wounds on him. Saul understood that if his enemies took him alive, the abuse would be terrible, so he ordered the squire, "Draw your sword and stab me, so that these uncircumcised will not come and abuse me." The squire did not dare to raise his hand against the anointed of God, so Saul himself rushed to the sword, and the squire followed his example. The next day the Philistines found the bodies, cut off Saul's head, and nailed his body to the wall of the city of Bethsan for all to see. This is how the life of the first king of Israel ended, from the anointed of God to the suicide bomber, whose body was hung on the wall by his enemies as an object of ridicule.